Mr. Pond Boss.
Here we go, going live.
To make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from beautiful Gordonville, Texas. I've been traveling quite a bit here the last 10 days or so. Spent a few days in Oregon, which was kind of a fun time. We've not been there before. There's Mike Cottrell, Jason Nipstad. See you guys. The trip to Oregon was really interesting. We kind of turned it into a vacation. Got to go look at a few ponds and spend some time at some wineries there in the Willamette Valley. Really, really pretty up there. I see Clark Cole checking in. John Wilson, not watching baseball today, or maybe you are, you're just doing this too. So anyway, we spent a little time in Oregon, and I ran up, I guess what's today? Wednesday. Yeah, it's got to be Wednesday, right? I ran up to the Purina Farm on yesterday and got to visit with those guys and take a look at the fish, see how their fish are growing up there, because they had drained a 6-acre lake and we renovated it and then got to restock it, so that worked out pretty good. Let's see here. There's Chuck Brinkman checking in. Clark Cole, yes sir. John Funk. Hey, Chuck, I was up there for like 4 hours, so I didn't really have time to catch up. I just had to go up there, make 2 meetings, come right back to catch up and do some things, but had a lot of fun. The lake over there at Purina Farm really looks good. You know, you guys are getting a lot of rain. And matter of fact, I was driving back when that storm was driving through where you guys live yesterday, and I hope you were safe. But that was kind of a booger bear storm, which when I left, I was about an hour in front of it as it was hammering Oklahoma. Went and had my meetings, turned around, and came right back through the second wave of storms. There's a lot. Speaking of storms, my gosh, there's a lot of that going on here lately. And I think I might want to talk about that a little bit. But what I want you guys, there's Danny Mack checking in, Jim Liner, Fred Bingaman. So we got Illinois, Alabama, San Antonio. We got Weatherford, Texas, Ohio, North Cackalack, Michigan, Missouri. Yep, there we go. Good to see you guys. Hey, Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. We do have a winner for the drawing last week, Rick Borden from Tampa, Florida. Rick, if you're watching, we need your address. Hey guys, you know the drill. If you'll type in hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section, click like and share this to your news feed, your timeline right now, then that will make you eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss mug that knows how to keep hot things hot, cold things cold, and a Pond Boss hat. So, Rick Borden, congratulations. You're the winner from the last drawing. And if you guys will do that, and we have been getting a pretty good bump in subscriptions, and I thank you guys for that. I really appreciate it. Pat Williamson from Oakwood, Texas. Todd Austin, Brian Merriweather, Pond Boss time. That's right, Todd Austin. You know the deal. So tonight, as I thought about it, driving back from Missouri or Oklahoma, I guess it was in Oklahoma last night. Driving back, I was trying to think of a topic, and I was talking to Leanne and the girls in the office, and they said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Shoot, I don't know." We pretty well hit all the highlight topics. So I said, you know what, let's just do a free-for-all where you guys come out and pitch out the questions you've got. I mean, Clark Cole, you're a physical therapist. You worked for me. Holy cow, like 1986 or 87. That's been a long time, buddy. You know, and there were some trying times back then, but we had some fun. You know, and that was about the time I was really kind of zeroing in and trying to figure out how to do the pond management thing. You know, there was no pond management industry back then. It was just a handful of guys trying to scratch out a living. And this issue of Pond Boss, the May-June issue, which is in mailboxes and at Bass Pro Shops right now. And if you guys want one, holler and let us know. We'll send you one, let you take a look at it, as long as you subscribe to it. But there's an article in here. I think I told you guys sometime back, I was invited to give a couple of speeches. One to the Society of Lake Management Professionals and another one to the American Fisheries Society Southern Division, and they wanted me to talk about the history of pond management. Well, as I was preparing for that speech, you know, a lot of memories came back. I started calling people. You know, there weren't very many people. There was no pond management industry back in 1980. There wasn't, when it wasn't a need for one. But over the last 40 years, it's really developed and has become a pretty cohesive industry. And I think Pond Boss has played a role in helping bring this industry together. But after I gave that speech, 4 or 5 guys came up and said, you know, you really ought to write a book about the history of pond management. No, I don't need to write. You going to buy it? Am I going to buy it? No, I'm not going to buy it because I'd write it. It might be good for my kids and grandkids someday, but who's going to buy that book? So as I thought about it, though, I thought, you know what? I could write a 4 or 5 part series about my perception of the pond management industry. Well, the first article in that series is in here. And then in the July issue, I had a pretty cool question come up. Last week I was on a boat dock talking to a guy in near West Texas. There's Kelly Duffy. Hey, Kelly. Daniel Hedrick. Eric Avery. Good to see you guys. Kelly Duffy, for those of you who don't know, works for Helena. And he is our Pond Boss go-to expert on all things aquatic plants. I mean, there's nobody that I know that knows more about aquatic plants and how to deal with them than Kelly Duffy. So I'm glad Kelly's chiming in. So if you guys got aquatic plant questions, we'll double team you. You know, I'll give you my answer, and then Kelly will give you the right answer. I hope, if Kelly doesn't hang up on me real quick. But, Kelly, I'm glad you're here, buddy. Good to see you. Anyway, I was standing on a dock, and I was kind of looking around. When I pull into a property, the first thing I start doing when I pull in the driveway is look around. You know, how do these people take care of their place? You know, is the grass mowed? Do they have hay meadows? What's the pond look like? What are their amenities? And what that does is it kind of helps give me a little insight into how they think. You know, so there's Jason Nepstead. I'll answer that question. That's a good one here in a minute. But as I was driving into this property, I saw where all the oak trees, it was covered in oak trees, all the oak trees were trimmed about roll bar high on a Kubota tractor. That told me that they like to mow the grass and not get their heads knocked off. You know, the fence was in meticulous condition. It had just been painted. It was a pipe and cable fence. You know, the driveway was edged. 1/4 mile it was edged. So I knew these folks were pretty organized and pretty retentive about the way that they take care of their property. So I got there, and man, the guy was excited. He wanted to go talk about his pond. So we walked around the cabin, down a little trail, onto the edge of the dock, and the first thing I saw on the backside corner of the dock, it was a covered dock most of the way. The far side of the dock wasn't covered, so he could cast. You know, but he had this really neat, custom-made dock box that looked like a buffet, or what do you call the things you hang clothes up, like a standing closet thing? You guys know, I don't. There's Susie Nugent, Dick Tabbert. And so he wanted to show me that. And so he comes and he opens this. It's made out of wood, and it's sealed really nice. It looks great. So he opens it up. When he opens the doors, each inside of the door are rod holders. And he's got all of his different rod and reel combos in there. It was really pretty cool. Where all he's got to do is open the door, you know, grab what he wants to fish with. There's already a bait tied on it. He had baits tied on anywhere from crank baits to spinner baits to soft plastics, wacky worm. He had probably 15, 18 different rod and reel combos in there. All of them were ready to go. And of course, he had a lock on it. That was a big deal. So he undid the lock, opened it up, and then there was a pegboard in the back. The pegboard had pegs coming out, and it looked like a little bitty miniature Bass Pro Shops. It was really pretty cool. And then I noticed he had, at the bottom, he had 2 shelves, and in those shelves he had plastic boxes stacked that were his tackle systems. Like if you wanted to get soft plastics, you take that box. If you wanted to get crankbaits, you get that box. But laying on the top of the shelf in the corner, I saw a fish tagging gun. And that kind of struck me. Arm War, that's it, Kelly Duffy, Arm War. I knew you'd know that. It looked kind of like a big fishing arm war. There you go. Good stuff. So anyway, Susie says hello, Bob. Hello, Susie. John Mashburn, good to see you. It's Pond Boss Magazine there, John. Let's see, Dick Tabber just got back from out back, caught some nice wide-bodied bluegills. Good, good, good. Well, anyway, I look at that tagging gun. I said, hey, what are you doing with your tagging gun? And this pond's probably 4 or 5 acres. It's a nice pond. He said, well, I'll show you. So he reaches in and he gets this an open-faced bait casting rod with a crankbait on it, turns to spun to his right, casts it out along the shore, cranked it, jerked a couple times, cranked, jerked a couple times. Bam, he catches about a 14 or 15 inch bass, weighs about a pound and a half, pulls it up, lips it, grabs his tagging gun, sticks it in the right beside the dorsal fin in the thick part of the back of the fish, pulls the trigger, injects a tag into that fish, looks at it, smiles, throws it in the pond. I said, wait a minute. Why aren't you weighing and measuring that fish if you're going to tag it? You need to write down the tag number, write down the length and weight. He says, oh, no, I don't do any of that. He says, what I do is I like to tag them. Then and I bought tags, one from a 0 to 100, so I know I got 100 tags, or 1 to 100. And all I'm trying to do is tag some fish, and then when I catch 20 fish and if 5 of them are tagged, then I know that I got to keep catching fish. So he was using his tags as a small indicator, or one of the indicators as to when he needed to harvest fish, which I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a pretty good spin on what we call mark and recapture. So we started talking. He said, well, should I weigh and measure them? So I started talking to him about it. I said, well, only if you want to track some individual fish, and only if you want to track the percentage of fish whose growth rates are better. You know, only if you want to try to extrapolate how many bass you may have that you need to catch and remove or harvest or release. You know, because if you tag a fish, you weigh it, measure it, write down the date, and when you do catch it again, you weigh it and measure it, and you can see if that fish is making progress or if it's losing weight. And, you know, if it's losing weight, you don't want it to play the game. He said, oh, okay, well, I didn't really look at it like that. So, anyway, that made me want to think about writing an article about tagging fish. So, in the July-August issue of Pond Boss, I came back and I wrote an article, a fairly, not real deep, pretty detailed article about tagging fish. Let's see what Jason said. How do you tell if a bluegill is mature? I would like to attempt to breed a pair. Will the brine shrimp work for the babies in the very early days of their lives? Or should I pump lake water through the large tank I plan to use? Well, Jason, those are all good questions. Bluegills are sexually mature if the female looks like she's got a marble in her belly, she's full of eggs. If the male bluegill has turned dark and exudes those bright colors, he's sexually mature. So, I'll tell you this. A bluegill can be sexually mature at 2.5 inches long. Not many people know that. I mean, that's this big. You know, I've seen them. As a matter of fact, in your lake, in the lake there, McFadden, the bluegill that we were looking at that were about 4 inches long, every one of those was sexually mature. And they all had the deep, rich male colors. So, once you figure out that if you've got, I tell you this, if you've got a female who's got that marble in her belly, and you catch a fish that's dark enough, and if you catch a male bluegill that doesn't have the dark colors, you can still tell that it's a male because his scales will be tipped in black. That's a good way to tell a male. So even if he's not showing his bold colors, you put him in with the right female confined in a tank, he's going to mature pretty fast if he's 3 or 4 inches long or bigger. So now, will brine shrimp work for the babies? Yes, they really will. The babies, now what, if you're going to do that, when you hatch the brine shrimp, then I would time it to where when those bluegill are really small, so are the brine shrimp. Now there's an article that's going to be in the July-August issue of Pond Boss that Mark Cornwell wrote. Those guys, really, really interesting. They have several hatchery ponds, and they'll artificially spawn walleye and take the fry and stock them into their hatchery ponds. They may stock 100,000 walleye fry in a small hatchery pond, hoping they can get 500 to 800 walleye 6 to 8 inches by October. That's what they try to do. Well, what they do is they've got some culture tanks that are about 1,000 gallons apiece. They run pond water in them, then fertilize them, and then aerate the water. And then when they get a really, really good green bloom, they'll take a little bit of pond water that they know has some Daphnia or some cladocerans or some other zooplankton in it, and they'll inoculate that plankton bloom with that pond water. And then they watch it, and they watch it, and it doesn't take long. A week, 10 days, the water begins to change color, and when that happens, they realize that they either need to add a little bit more fertilizer or be paying attention to their plankton, because they're trying to time it to where they've got all these gazillions, literally millions of water fleas. Oh gosh, all these. If you had them in a jar and you held the jar up and looked really closely, you could see these little brown and white bugs that look like tiny, tiny little fleas swimming around in the water. So when they do that, then they release that water. They pull a plug and open the pipe and release the water into the hatchery pond where they're growing those walleye, so their walleye fry can get a jump start, and hopefully they can increase the survival rates. So, yes, you could. Now, you said, could I pump lake water through the large tank that I plan to? Yeah, you could. You sure can. Yes, you can. Now, the only downside to that is that you got to be real careful that you're not pumping in any fish. Now, you want to be pumping from the top layer of the water so that you're getting that good zooplankton. Now, you may want to filter it. And if you filter it with window screen, because you want the tiny little bugs to get through. Because if you let one dragonfly larva that's about that big get through, it'll eat 2/3 of your baby bluegills before they ever get a chance to come off the beds. So I would filter the water, but I wouldn't filter it with a micro filter or a saran sock or something like that. I'd filter it with a window screen. And because all you're trying to do is keep the biggest bugs out. Now, on your mature bluegill, you can feed them little fish food. Now, another thing I'd be doing, if you want to try to hatch baby bluegills, get some of that Aquamax MVP fish food, put it in a pillowcase, and crush it. Or check with a local fish hatchery and see if you can buy some of the Purina fry starter food. It's a 48% protein, mostly fish meal, and you can grind that up into little bitty pieces and start feeding your baby bluegills, and they'll respond to that feed. Now, the downside to feeding bluegills, then you really are compelled to be pumping lake water so you don't allow your water to deteriorate. Because until those bluegill until they really start wrapping their little mouths around that fish food and eating it, there's going to be some waste, and the water's going to want to do something ugly with that waste. So let's see. You guys pitch some questions at me. Don't make me think. Or make me think. All right, let's see here. John Mashburn's checking in. Dick Tabber just got back. Okay, we got that. Victor Smith. Hey, Victor, good to see you. Rip Rutherford, how you doing? Rip, I'm doing great. I still lead a pretty cool life. How about you? Jimmy Mitchell. Hey, Bob, stocking new fish in a small river after a good flood. Good or bad idea? There's Leanne and her mama Joyce checking in. Hey, girls. Stocking new fish in a small river after a good flood. Good or bad idea? Okay, let me tell you about that. When fish reproduce in a stream, there's a concept in fisheries management called plasticity. And plasticity basically is a funky word that tells you that the most fit of the fish that you stock for that environment will be the ones that thrive. So if let's say you were going to take and stock some bluegill into a river after a flood and the river's receded, if you put 100 bluegill in there, 30 or 40 of those probably have the plasticity that it takes to be able to adapt to that environment and then thrive. And those would be the ones that would grow up and then begin to reproduce. And the thing is when you stock a river after a flood, are they going to have the fish going to have enough time in the right habitat to establish above and beyond the existing fish that were there before, or that washed downstream from upstream, or that swam upstream from downstream? So stocking a river is a kind of a shotgun approach. Even if you think about it, you might do well, you might not. But if you want to pitch a couple $100 at it, sure, do that. Just figure out what kind of fish would be most suited to the river that you'd want. Like channel catfish, bluegill, maybe largemouth bass. Kind of depends on the conditions of the river. Let's see here. Robert Dyer says, how many times a year do yellow perch spawn? One time. Yellow perch typically spawn first. If they inhabit a pond, they're probably spawning first, and they do that in cold water when the water's in the 40s. They like to stick their eggs in jelly-like strings that cling to plants. So if you've got Christmas trees or aquatic plants or tree limbs or something under the water, the yellow perch can stick their eggs in that mass on. They will spawn. And they're going to spawn one time and then they're done. Let's see. Patrick Houston says, I've got a pond overrun with green sunfish. What's the best way to control their population? Well, Patrick, this will be kind of fun. Green sunfish typically spawn one time a year. They have a big mouth, so they can grow faster than other sunfish like bluegill that have a small mouth. Bluegill, depending on where you are, will reproduce anywhere from 2 to 5 times a year. Like where I am here in North Texas, they'll spawn at least 4 times a year, and in some years they'll spawn 5 times. So simply by attrition, within 3 or 4 years, bluegill will outcompete green sunfish, even though green sunfish have a bigger mouth and can outcompete in the food chain with bluegills. Then when you throw in a predator like a largemouth bass, green sunfish they can't be the dominant species for longer than about 18 months or 2 years. So I got 2 answers for you there, Patrick. If you're overrun with green sunfish, you can either poison the pond and start over using rotenone if you want to do that. Now you got to have an applicator's license to buy rotenone or hire somebody to do it for you. You know, or you can stock some largemouth bass and some adult bluegills, feed the fish, and then the largemouth bass over 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years, they will pretty much wear out those green sunfish and get their numbers way, way down as the bluegill numbers are going up. That's a good way to do that. Let's see, Rip Rutherford says, I got a 15-acre lake. Tell me about stocking bullfrogs and crawfish. Well, I'll tell you this. Tell me where your lake is, and then I'll refine my answer. But while I'm waiting on you to do that, Christopher Aguilar says, what's up? Man, I need some boudin, dude. Send some. Mark Dyer, watching on vacation. That's a heck of a way to say. I don't know if I'd watch this on vacation. Maybe I would. It's pretty fun. Let's see here. Oh, okay, Patrick's in North Texas. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, we can probably help you with that, Patrick. So, Rip, let's see. Ashley Barrett, best habitat to help fatheads. All right, I'll get to that here in a minute, Ashley. Okay, I'm going to come back to Rip. If you've got a 15-acre lake that's got a few years under its belt and you don't have bluegill and crawfish, there's a reason for it. Now, the reason for it typically is because you got a lot of bass, and bass are going to eat bullfrogs and they're going to eat crawfish. Now, the thing about stocking crawfish, you can stock crawfish and they're either going to establish or they're not. And by about the 3rd year, you're going to know that. So what I tell people, if you want to stock some crawfish, by all means do that. Buy native crawfish to where you live. If you live in Iowa, don't go get Louisiana crawfish. If you live in Arkansas, don't go get Oklahoma crawfish. You got to stock crawfish that are native to where you are. Fish hatcheries have them. Crawfish farms grow them. You know, now, the thing is if you're checking stomach contents on bass from time to time, you're going to know if you've got crawfish because they're so easy to catch and bass love them that you'll see a claw sticking out of the gullet, or if you're filleting some bass, see what they ate. And if you've got crawfish, there's really no reason to stock any unless you're wanting to give those fish a snack. Then that can be a good idea. A lot of guys do that. Now on the bullfrogs, I mean, we've got 8 ponds on 12 acres. I love to hear the bullfrogs croak at night. But we've got so many herons. We've got a couple of big snapping turtles. We got bass. And if a bullfrog lasts more than about a month at our house, that's a record. You know, so the thing about bullfrogs is you got to be sure you don't have something that will eat them. So what a lot of guys will do if they want bullfrogs is they'll probably have another small pond on the property. They'll renovate that pond, stock some bullfrog tadpoles in it, which we can buy. It takes about 2 years for a bullfrog tadpole to turn into a bullfrog. But if you've got a pond with no fish in it and it's got a little bit of depth, then odds are you can have some bullfrogs. So let's see here. Let's go on down there. We got a few comments coming in. Ashley Barrett, best habitat to help fatheads, shad, bluegill to reproduce, and the best results to help with largemouth bass. Okay, let's take that. Fathead minnows like to stick their eggs on the underneath sides of firm objects. Wooden pallets are good. PVC pipe is good as long as it's at least 3 inches in diameter. As long as there's something solid where a fathead minnow male can come up underneath it, scratch it with his nose. He has these little knots on his nose called tubercles, little fatty knots when he's breeding. And he'll clean out a spot about as big around as a silver dollar or a half a dollar. And then the female will lay eggs. He'll push them up there after they're fertile, and he'll sit on them until they hatch. That's the kind of habitat you need for fathead minnows. Bluegill are colony spawners. They like to spawn in water 6 inches to 18 inches deep. They love gravel substrate, especially pea gravel, or a sandy bottom, or a firm clay bottom. And they'll spawn 15 to 500 nests in a colony. They look kind of like the hoof print of a calf or a cow. You know, if you've got that, they're going to spawn. So they need fairly shallow water. Threadfin shad reproduce from about 30 minutes before daylight till about 30 minutes after the sun comes up, and they run the perimeter of where they live, and they'll be sticking their eggs on grass. So if you don't have any grass, go buy some coastal Bermuda hay or some thin-bladed hay, put it around, spread it out, fluff it out, and put it around the edges of your pond, and those threadfins will spawn on that. Now, if you're asking about gizzard shad, they don't need any habitat. They're going to lay 250,000 eggs. They're going to be fertilized. They're semi-buoyant. Nature wishes them luck. Either they make it or they don't. So let's see. Jason Nebb said, how many hybrid stripers would you recommend for 130 acres? Would like to make open water more productive and try to keep gizzard shad in check. Also, who wouldn't like to look out there in the lake and see schooling fish? 10 to the acre. You know, I'd say 10 to the acre, no more than 20 to the acre. And the way I would do that, Jason, knowing your lake a little bit, I would put 1,300 in it. Then I'd wait 2 years, and I would do that again. Then I would see how that population evolves, and then I would replenish fish later as attrition occurs and people are harvesting fish. So, you know, stock every 2 years, every 3 years, maybe every 4 years to keep a juniversity coming up the food chain there. Stocking just bluegill brim, and let's see, Matt Singley here, he says, I'm stocking just bluegill brim in a small 1/2 to 3/4 acre pond. Would you have to stock a few bass to keep them from getting overpopulated? Yes, you would. I presume that when you're stocking bluegill, you want to grow really big sunfish. If that's the case, bluegill, since they spawn so prolifically, you're going to want to stock a predator fish there to keep their numbers in check. Bass can certainly do that. Well, one of the ways to grow big bluegill, one of the techniques that we use in fisheries management is to get some bass and let them get overcrowded. You know, that 1/2 to 3/4 acre pond, if you had 10 male bass that are 12 inches long, they'd keep the bluegill numbers in check. So the answer is yes, because you're going to want to deal with overpopulation. Now, another spin on that is that was one of the reasons hybrid sunfish were created. Hybrid sunfish don't reproduce at nearly the rates that bluegill do, and you're not as compelled to have predator fish in there, and you can feed those hybrids. They got a little bit bigger mouth than bluegills do, and the hybrid sunfish will get pretty big. They won't get as big as the bluegill I've seen, but they'll get pretty big. So it kind of depends on your goals. All right, let's see here. Rip Rutherford, I have plenty of perch. Bass Drop, Smithville. Okay. All right, if you've got plenty of sunfish, then I would be checking stomach contents on my bass to see if you have crawfish. I would just about bet you do. And if you don't, then I'd stock some, and I'd stock some red swamp crawfish out of southeast Texas. You can buy them over there. There's some around Beaumont. There's several really big crawfish farms. If you don't have a source, let me know, and I'll help you find one. Let's see here. Christopher Aguilar, had to buy a new bush hog shredder. Now I need a loan to buy a cup of red worms. Well, that's what happens when you live in Louisiana. Grass grows. My uncle, way back a long time ago, showed me a way to get where I don't have to buy any red worms. What he did was pretty cool. He took this extension cord. Actually, I think he took a cord off of a lamp from his mama's house. This was probably 1965. And I'm going to tell you this, but don't do it because you'll die. And I don't want to be responsible. And nobody here wants to be responsible for anybody else's death, right? So what he did was he split the cord and he cut the insulation off, and he got 2 pieces of copper tubing and hammered them flat. Then he drilled a hole in one end of one of them, and he put one of the wires in there, and then he drilled a hole and did the same thing with the other piece of copper tubing. They were like 24 inches long. And then put wires there, and then he, after a rain, he would take those 2 copper wires and put them about 10 feet, flat copper tubes, and he'd stick them in the ground about 10 feet apart. Then he'd plug them into an extension cord, make us back up, so we didn't get electrocuted. And then he would go plug that into his non-grounded electric outlet. And then we would stand there, and it wouldn't take 3 minutes. You'd see red wigglers crawling out of the ground to get away from the electricity. Then he'd go over there and unplug his extension cord. Then we'd go start picking up worms so we could go fishing. So if you got an extra wire and you don't want to borrow money to buy worms, you can go make them come out of the ground. Brian Merriweather, are there any other hybrid bluegill other than the blue-green sunfish? You know, there has been some experimentation over time. One of the hatcheries in Arkansas, I think it's Malone's, has been working to cross red ear with another species of sunfish, and he's calling it a speckle-belly perch or something. I don't know, but the traditional hybrid sunfish is a cross between a female green sunfish and a male bluegill. And that's been the traditional cross, and that all happened in the 80s and early 90s. And what was going on is guys in the fish farm business, as people were getting their legs. See, there were really no sport fish farms back in the early 80s. That didn't really start happening. There was one, like Holyoke, Ken's Fish Hatchery in Georgia, and that guy was he was all hat and no cattle. There was Hartley Fish Farms up in Kingman, Kansas. He grew bass and bluegill. But there were no commercial sport fish hatcheries anywhere except a handful that sold some fish retail. There was Zet's up in Pennsylvania, I think. But these different hybrids started evolving in the 80s, and I can remember talking to these guys about it, and most of them settled in on that particular cross. I mean, there's crosses between red ear and bluegill, but they won't eat fish food. And if a fish farm can't feed the fish and make them grow to maximize their production, they don't want to deal with it. You know, it's where the hybrid sunfish cross between female greens and male bluegills, they will eat fish food. Bluegills eat fish food. Green sunfish are raised on fish farms for fish bait. And not so much now as they were years ago, but you see green sunfish in every dadgum watershed in the country. So I don't know of any other hybrid sunfish that are commercially viable. Now, I come across natural hybrid crosses all the time. I see crosses between bluegill and red ear sunfish fairly commonly in private ponds. I'll see crosses between red ear and green sunfish in private ponds, where you might have a little weather anomaly where the female green sunfish is ready to spawn and the males are kind of done, and there's a red ear ready. So you'll see some of that, but I don't know if anybody's doing that. Dion Myers is checking in. He says, is it okay to move large bass from one pond to another? You know, I used to really think that was a good idea, but now actually it's become one of my pet peeves, believe it or not. Here's the way I see that. If a bass, before I get to that, Christopher says, but the hybrids can't reproduce, right? Well, that's mostly true. 95% of those hybrid sunfish are males. The other 5% are females that don't have viable eggs. So that pretty well disqualifies all of them from reproducing, unless there's another species of sunfish. So if you've got some bluegills in there with your hybrids, the male hybrids can reproduce with those bluegills. But what are you going to get? You know, you don't know. I've seen that happen where the offspring came out with blunt noses or their backs were bent. Not all of them, but you're going to end up with something inferior, you know, nonetheless. All right, so now, Dion, when it comes to moving large bass, here's the way I see that. I don't know if you heard me talking earlier, but there's a concept in fisheries called plasticity. When a fish, since we're talking about largemouth bass, when a bass spawns in your lake, a percentage of those fish are going to thrive in that environment. They're going to learn how to play the game in that lake. And the ones that learn how to play excel. Then there's others that don't quite get it, but they're still above average. Then there's a percentage that's average. Then there's the rest of those that just aren't going to thrive in that environment. And they're either going to get eaten or just not grow very well and just kind of fall by the wayside, so to speak. When you take that one of those big bass from that environment over there and you move it into this environment over here, even if this environment's better, in your opinion, that there's no guarantee or any assurance at all that that large bass is going to thrive in that environment. Odds are pretty high that it won't. And I've learned that lesson the hard way. One lesson I learned that I'll always remember. There was this really wealthy guy to Houston that had just sold his business. He was in his mid-70s, and he wanted to build a lake, which he did. Covered about 9 acres. And his comments to me was, son, I know you biologist boys like to tell us to stock these little finger-length fish in there. He said, son, I don't even buy green bananas. I'm not sure I'll be here when they get ripe, and I damn sure don't want to wait on a little bitty finger-length fish to grow up. So I want to be able to fish in my lake as soon as it's built. You got that? Yes, sir, I do. I got that. And I said, you know, it's going to be kind of expensive. He said, son, don't worry about the mule going blind. Go load the wagon. So I said, oh, okay, all right. I'm kind of getting that. This was probably 1990, 91. I'd really been zeroed in on pond management for 4 or 5 years, so I was still trying to get my legs under me on that deal. So I contacted a rancher friend of mine that had a bunch of ponds, way more than he'd ever fished, and I called him. I said, hey, Ronnie, you want to sell a few big bass? And he said, well, I might. What are you talking about? And I said, well, I got a guy that I think he'd like to buy a couple of double-digit bass. He said, oh, no way. No, it's too much. Takes too much to get a big bass to 12 pounds, so I'm not going to do that. So I called this guy back down in Houston. I said, hey, I got a guy that's got some, but just like I figured, he isn't going to sell them. He said, what's he got? And I said, well, I know there's one lake. He's got a shocker boat, and I take my shocker boat, take his shocker boat, and I bet you we could go shock up some big ones, but he doesn't want to sell them. He said, money whip him. I said, money whip him. Money whip him. So I called him back. I said, hey, Ronnie, that guy, he's going to buy $20,000 worth of your bass if you want to sell them, but he's not going to do it unless you'll sell him 2 double-digit bass. He said, I'm not going to do it. I said, Ronnie, would you take $200 a piece for double-digit bass? Now, you got to remember, this was like 1990 or 91. He said, no. I said, would you take $400 a piece for double-digit bass? He said, no way. I said, would you take $500 a piece for double-digit bass? And he paused. And I thought, oh my gosh, we just established a principle. Now we're just working on the price. So Ronnie says, you think that idiot would pay $500 a piece for double-digit bass? I said, yep, he sure would. Then he'd buy $20,000 worth of bass of yours that are from a pound to 6 or 7 pounds if you'll part with some that big. He says, all right, I'll do that. So I called the guy back, and he says, did you money whip him? I said, yes, sir, I did. He said, good, what'd you do? I said, would you pay $1,000 a piece for 2 double-digit bass? He said, load the wagon, son, bring them on down. We're going to do that. Well, where I'm going with that is we got, I can't remember the number, it was a 9-acre lake, and we stocked around 1,500 to 1,800 pounds of bass that he spent $20,000 on. And we stocked them in this 9-acre lake on top of $50,000 worth of bait fish. A fish didn't have to swim 2 feet and open its mouth and make a sucking noise, and it had food. Well, one bass was 12 pounds and 5 ounces, and another one was 11 and a half. So I'll never forget, we stocked those bass in there along with a number of 4-pounders, 5-pounders, a handful of 6s and 7s, quite a few 1.5 to 3-pound bass. And I came back, and this was in the spring, and I came back in the fall with my electrofishing boat, and we tagged all the big bass. So we got the 2 big bass, and that 12-pound, 5-ounce bass had grown to 11 pounds and 9 ounces. The 11.5-pound bass had grown to just over 10.5. It had lost a pound. The next spring, we checked them again. That 12.5-pound bass had dropped to 10.5. The 11.5 weighed 9 3/4, and they were eggy, but they looked horrible. And about 30% of the rest of the fish were thriving, and about 25% of the rest of the fish were about average or a little above average. All the rest of them were losing weight. And it had everything to do with the fact that we took them out of that environment where they were thriving and moved them into this environment. Even though it might have been a better environment, they weren't conditioned to that. So I'm not a fan of moving big bass from one pond to another pond. I think if that fish grew big in that pond, it deserves to die in that pond. That's my opinion on it. That was a long way around, but that's a pretty entertaining story. Robert Dyer, is it possible for a largemouth bass with a poor relative weight when living in one pond could thrive and improve its relative weight in another pond? Probably not. Now, let's just stay with that concept. Let's say that it can. Let's say the relative weight of that bass in this pond is 85, and you move it over here and you can get it to 100. Although that sounds great, that fish has lost enough growth time that you're going to see it on the back end of its life. So even if that bass had the nature and the propensity to hit 8 pounds, and when you moved it, it weighed 2 pounds, it should have weighed 2 3/4. By the time it catches up and begins to grow like it should have, it won't get nearly as big as it could have. So any fish with a relative weight that's under about 90 probably needs to be culled and pitched, not try to be salvaged and used. Or is this just a fish that will always have, it may not always have a poor relative weight, because relative weight is mostly, I'm going to tell you, relative weight 85% of the time, maybe even more than that, is a function of environment. It's a function of not having enough food, competing with its peers, not having the right habitat. So even if you replace all that and that fish does regain its weight, it's lost its potential. So I would take it out. All right, let's see. Susie Nugent, our pond is getting a red coloring during the heat of the day. We're aerating from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Our pond is getting a red coloring. There's only 2 things I can think of right off my head that would be. And if you're aerating from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., that probably is. Do you have any rocks in your pond? Oh my gosh, if I get this right, you're going to think I'm smart. All right, so she says, will that harm the fish? Well, if you've got rocks in your pond, depending on the kind of rocks you have, this is going to sound crazy, but it's true. Those rocks can grow a certain kind of periphyton, an algae-based biofilm that has red pigmentation. And when you kick on the aeration system, the aeration, the water movement from the bubble plume, can make that stuff release and then disperse into the water column and turn it kind of red color. The other thing is if there's some iron laying on the bottom because it's been filled with a well, or there's a lot of iron ore in the rocks in the area, that's another reason they can turn kind of red. The third reason is if you've got some clay that's heavy enough that if you physically stir it up, it's going to suspend in the water and actually make the water muddy. I don't think any of that will harm the fish, but there are some red colored algae, like along the coast. You've heard of the red tide. You can have something like that. Kelly's chiming in, Euglena. It could be that. It sure could be. It sure could be a red pigmented algae. And could that harm your fish? It depends on how dense it is. If it gets really, really thick, it could. It could. Here's what you need to do. If you're concerned about that, get a sample of it. Send me an email. Send an email to info@pondboss.com, and I'll tell you how to collect a sample and preserve it. And we can send it to Bill Cody up in Melinta, Ohio, the pond doctor. Let him identify it and then tell us what to do about it. So, Kelly, if you want to throw your thoughts in there, type those in real quick, and I'll read those out loud to everybody. But it could be Susie. Where are you? I don't remember where your pond is. Tell us where your pond is. All right, we're knocking on the door at 7:14. I'm gonna do a commercial. Spent a little time at the Purina farm yesterday, and man, their lake looks good. We touched off a Texas Hunter feeder. I love Texas Hunter feeders. As a matter of fact, here on the inside front cover of Pond Boss magazine, there's a big old ad for Texas Hunter feeders. They absolutely have the best feeders on the market, bar none. Now, if you haven't bought a feeder before, you might get a little sticker shock, but you spread it out over the 15 years, that feeder's going to work. It's not that expensive. Purina, Sportfish, MVP. We touched off the feeder yesterday about 5 times, and every time we touch it off, the bluegill just rolled all over it. Let's see here. Kelly Duffy, a photo is worth 1,000 verbal descriptions. Yep, that's true. Pineville, Louisiana. You know what? You could have Euglena over there. So I'll tell you what. See, Susie, look there where Kelly put, look at that word Euglena, and you look that up and see if you can find pictures of it and see if that's what you've got. And if you think you do, then send us an email and I'll tell you how to preserve a sample, and we'll send it to Bill Cody and let him tell us what it is, and then we'll get with Kelly and figure out what you need to do about it. So what Kelly's saying is get a picture. So I think that's a good idea. Instead of him trying to tell you what it looks like, take a look at it, take a picture of it. Hey guys, tell your friends please about Pond Boss. $35 a year. You know what my favorite line is, that you're going to spend more than $35 on a Friday night date with your better half. And that's going to be gone the next day. This is going to last a year. And I promise you, every issue, there's some nuggets in here, some things that you didn't know that are going to help you be a better pond meister and help you be a better steward of your land and water. And really, that's what drives me to publish this magazine. I think part of my calling from God is to help, my divine calling, if I have one, is to help you be a better steward of your land and water. And that's part of what we try to do and convey through Pond Boss. So I would love to do that for you. I'd love for you to get out there and tell people about the magazine, get people to subscribe to it. You can go online at pondboss.com. Call the office at 903-564-6144 and get a subscription. $35 a year. It's worth it. And we'll also send you a copy of this year's resource guide. You know what? And I tell you what, I'm working on a couple of little promotional things. We'll see what we do. David Figgs checking in from Georgia. Hi, David. Christopher says, our Cajun buddy says, Pond Boss magazine makes a great birthday or Christmas gift. Just saying. Hey, absolutely right. Jason Nipstad, it's amazing the changes in our lake this spring with a large amount of carp being removed. We have baby fish everywhere. That's huge, buddy, because carp may not be eating fry, but they're disrupting spawns. And by getting rid of a bunch of carp and you've got those baby fish, you're going to be stunned at how fast that lake responds. You know, the good thing is if you can add some Florida strain bass and some copper-nosed bluegill, you can influence that population before all these baby fish come in, and they're the ones that totally influence the whole population. Water clarity's improved. Yep. My concern is the carp will have a successful spawn, also since they aren't destroying each other's eggs. Yeah, maybe so. That sure could happen, but at least you're going to get a jump start from all these other species of fish. If you can get a jump start by stocking those largemouth bass you were talking about and give them the advantage, and the bluegills are doing what they're doing, baby bluegill will eat carp eggs. So, you know, right now your lake stands the best chance it's going to have for a long, long time to get a jump start and get ahead of those carp. Cody Sandoff, thanks for helping with my overpopulated bass question last week. You bet. When stocking adult bluegill, how soon should I start feeding? If I also just added adult tilapia, I'd start that right now. Start feeding. Start feeding now. Start feeding those tilapias. And you know what? I'd even start feeding before I stocked adult bluegills, because that's going to impart that scent into the water, especially if you're using Aquamax MVP. That's the best fish food that I know of on the market, Aquamax MVP. That's designed for those species of fish, bluegills especially. And tilapia will eat it. Although the tilapia, I don't know how many you ended up stocking. I think I recommended 10 pounds for you. But if you stock 10 pounds, they're going to kind of ratchet up into the shallow areas, begin to reproduce. They're mouth breeders. So the male is going to carry the babies or the eggs in his mouth. When the babies hatch, he'll spit them out. Matter of fact, if you go down to your pond right now, this time of day, real easy, oftentimes you can see a male bluegill by the shore spitting the babies out, sucking them back in, spitting them out, sucking them back in. He's just a couple of days away from letting them out, and those baby bluegill are going to go feed on algae. Jason says, the F1 tiger bass arrive next week. Excellent. Timing's perfect for that, because with all those baby fish you've got in there, baby carp, whatever you've got, those F1 tiger bass are going to grow so fast you won't believe it. Let's see here. Kerry Beckman, have a small pond the size of an in-ground pool, 4 feet deep at the dam, built 13 years ago. I put everything that would grow in it. Looked great for 4 years, but had to keep adding water when the plants took over. Killed everything, got it cleaned out this week and drained. How do I seal it? I've heard of everything. What's the cheapest way? Oh boy. What's the cheapest way to... There's Ronnie Bullard. Hi, Ronnie. What's the cheapest way to seal it? How was it sealed before? And if it was sealed with clay, that's your best answer. I'll tell you this. Look in Pond Boss magazine. Look in the resource. If you don't have a Pond Boss, go to our resource guide at pondboss.com and look up soil flock. For a pond that size, that's probably your best answer. Look for soil flock. And then spend a few minutes on the Ask the Boss forum and pose a question to TJ Hudson. I think he calls himself, it's TEEJAEH, TJ. Just post a question about soil flock, leaky pond. He'll help you answer that question. Let's see. Zach Russell says, bluegill are spawning like crazy as well in the beds we made. Honestly, didn't know we had that many fish after the electrofishing results were so poor. That's kind of funny, isn't it? You know, the thing about electrofishing is it gives you a snapshot of the fishery that day. And it's influenced by the temperature of the water, cloudiness, what time of day you do it, what time of year you do it, how deep your water is. I mean, we shocked a lake that's got some deep water, and we hit it about 30 minutes after a major storm blew through. We had to pull the truck out of the mud after we got through shocking because it was so slick when we launched the boat. But we shocked up more fish that had moved to the edges and were spawning and feeding in that 15-acre lake than we'd ever seen before. So sometimes the timing of the electrofishing is important. However, the good thing about electrofishing is it's random. It's unbiased. Now, just because you didn't collect fish electrofishing doesn't mean they don't exist, and this is a prime example of that. Brian Merriweather, what's a tiger bass? That's a great question. Christopher Aguilar, hey, Father's Day is coming up, guys and gals. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Yep, that's right. $35 a year. That is really a great gift for Father's Day. I'm a father. I would love to have a subscription to this, except I get to see it before it's printed. All right, what's a tiger bass? A tiger bass is a cross between northern strain largemouth bass and Florida strain largemouth bass. The term tiger bass is trademarked by American Sportfish Hatchery out of Montgomery, Alabama. But I got to learn years ago what those guys do. They took the best of their Florida bass, and even to this day, they're continually adding superior fish to their brood fish. They pit tag every fish. They don't necessarily have them named, but everyone's numbered. They know the length and weight when they started with it. They can project how many eggs it's going to lay, and then they cross it with a northern strain largemouth bass. Now, sometimes they'll cross the male northerns with the female Floridas, but when they do that, you can bet they're using the biggest northern largemouth bass males they can get, and vice versa. You know, so a tiger bass is a trademark name for that first generation F1 intergrade cross between Florida strain largemouth bass of superior genetics with northern strain largemouth bass of superior genetics. That's a tiger bass. All right, so here we are at 7:23. My gosh, I didn't think we could just shoot the breeze for about no particular topics for that long, but holy cow, we have, haven't we? You know, I do, if Chris Blood was checking in, he'd tell me to plug myself. Well, since I did sell my pond management division to American Sportfish Hatchery, and they've taken over the day-to-day management, and I'm not managing employees and accounts and that sort of thing, I have now gotten freed up to where I can go help you if you need me to. Now, I love, here's what I love to do and what I'm really, really good at. I can sit down with you and get into your head, listen to what you say, hear you, figure out what your goals are, and then take a look at the resources you've got with your pond, your lakes, you know, your ranch, the people that work for you, the equipment, a budget, whatever, and figure out how to get you from where you are to where you want to be. Now, one of my favorite things is to design new fishing lakes. And I've got 4 of those under contract right now. If it quits raining, we'll start building lakes. You know, I mean, a pond guy, I don't ever complain about the rain. I would like for it to slow down a little bit because we got enough. You know, go share it with somebody that needs it more than we do. But the minute I say that, we're going into a drought. So I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. But I would consider it an honor to help you, and just let me know. You can send me an email at boblusk@outlook.com or comment in this thread or send me a private message on Facebook and I'll get it and I'll respond to you. I talked to a couple of guys on the phone today. Broken Tommy Spurgeon. I'll get to you here in just a minute on your emergency there. I talked to a couple guys. One of them today asked me, he said, have you ever thought about doing like a private seminar? Yes, I have. I've been thinking about that for about 10 years. And if this is interesting to you, let me know. Because here's what I've been thinking about for about 10 years. And I'm about ready to pull the trigger because now I've got time to do it. I've thought about having two in-house seminars at my house. We have a 4,600 square foot house that's built to entertain and host people with 8 ponds on it. I've got some real good clients within an hour's drive. So here's what I'm thinking about. The Bob Lusk Institute of Higher Pondology. Now you're going to pay a pretty good fee. You're going to pay $1,500 or something like that, plus some overnight fees depending on which room you want to sleep in. And we'll pick you up at the airport on a Thursday afternoon, bring you back to the house. We're going to do some pond analysis. I'll bring in a couple of guest speakers. We'll go do a field trip to a beautiful ranch with a 65-acre lake and a 20-acre lake, analyze the ponds on my property, spend time going through a curriculum, and get your knowledge ramped up to where you know way more about it than you do now. If that's something that's interesting to you, I'd like to do a little test marketing and just see. You guys let me know if you're interested in that. All right, so the Spurgeons, the emergency. I just caught a shiner in my freshly stocked acre pond with slime-like sludge growing on him. What to do? If you just stocked that shiner's got a fungus. That's the third thing that went wrong. The first thing that happened in that shiner is it was distressed some way. Probably got bumped with a dip net when it got picked up, or got smashed in the fish tank, or got crushed a little bit when it was first seined out of the pond. Then it got a bacterial infection followed by this fungus. Saprolegnia is the name of it. That fish is probably going to die. But I know this, if you put it back, chances are that it could heal from that. But it's not going to spread that to other fish. If that's your concern, you think it's going to spread it to other fish, it's not going to do that. That is caused from a physical stressor or a physical injury. And that's something that's happened, the second, third, fourth thing. Grandpa in wintertime forgets to put his clothes on, goes get the mail, comes back in, and a week later he's got pneumonia. Then he dies. He didn't die from pneumonia. He died because he went down to get the mail without his clothes on. These fish were distressed, and that fungus is a consequence of that. Chad Gillespie, is it possible for a channel cat and a bullhead to mix? No, not really. Their spawning habits are so different that they don't really interbreed. I've never come across that. Now, I have seen in a hatchery circumstance where hatchery managers have crossed blue cats with channel cats, but I've never seen bullheads crossed with channel cats. They just don't spawn the same way. Channel catfish are cavity spawners. Bullheads aren't. So they just don't cross over that way. Let's see. I've caught some bullheads that have the color of channel cats, just no forked tails. Probably not. They're probably bullheads. Carrie Beckman, is sodium bentonite the fix of all problems? It's a good solution for the ones it fixes. No, it's not a good solution to all problems. If you're going to try to seal sand with sodium bentonite, not going to work. But it's a good choice for the right application. That's part of what you got to figure out, is if you got the right application. Let's see here. I want to scroll back up here and make sure I didn't miss something here. Like for Carrie Beckman here on sealing that pond, sodium bentonite might be a good choice. Might be a good choice, but you got to find the leak with sodium bentonite. That polymer I was telling you about, it has a tendency to seek the leak. That's why you need to do a little homework. The bentonite might work for you, but where's the leak? If you know where the leak is, if you're willing to drain it, then sodium bentonite would be a good choice. If you're willing to drain it, then go back in and line the entire basin with it, till it in, compact it, then it would fix it. Where do bullheads spawn? Bullheads spawn in shallow water in the open. They'll make a nest kind of like a bluegill does, but they don't really sit on their eggs, and it doesn't take long. It takes like 3 days for their eggs to hatch, and another day or two, and the school will fry her up, and they're on their own. Katie Mack, how much for a spouse? I guess it depends on whose spouse it is. Good luck to you. All right, guys. Hey, it's been fun hanging out with you. Palm Boss Magazine. Please share this video. It's been good. I will check in with you next Wednesday. Not sure where I'm going to be, but I'll make it a point to be somewhere where we can check in and have a good chit-chat. So, appreciate you guys watching, and until next week, adios.